The Grand Hall of the Galactic Coalition Military Academy could hold 3,000 beings from 100 different species. Today, every seat was filled. Cadets and officers and dignitaries had come from across the station to witness what the official announcement called a special commendation ceremony. Everyone knew the real reason they were there. They wanted to see the human who had done the impossible. Jisoo stood at attention near the front of the hall, wearing a fresh uniform that someone had found in her size. Beside her, Bomi sat calmly on a specially reinforced platform, the stalker's collar polished and its armor gleaming under the ceremonial lights. The creature seemed to understand that this was an important moment. It held perfectly still, only its yellow eyes moving as it tracked the crowd. Commandant Vexrol stepped up to the podium, his insectoid body casting long shadows across the stage. The compound eyes that had judged so many cadets now focused on the small human woman who had rewritten everything the Academy thought it knew about survival. Cadet Park Jisoo, the commandant began, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive hall. You were deployed to VRF-7, a Class-7 Deathworld, due to an administrative error that should have resulted in your immediate death. Instead, you survived for 14 standard days. You constructed shelter, secured food and water, documented the local ecosystem, and formed a symbiotic bond with an apex predator. By every metric we use to measure survival performance, you have achieved the highest score in Academy history. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some voices carried disbelief. Others carried awe. The board has reviewed your case extensively. Vexrol continued. We have consulted xenobiologists, military strategists, and psychological experts. The consensus is unanimous. You pass. Polite applause filled the hall. Jisoo allowed herself a small smile. Furthermore, the commandant added, raising a hand for silence, the board has approved an unprecedented request. The creature designated Bomi will be permitted to remain at the Academy as a registered emotional support animal under Cadet Park's care. The applause this time was much louder, mixed with sounds of surprise and even some nervous laughter of Vareth. Stalker had just been officially classified as a therapy pet after the ceremony. Commandant Vexrol requested a private meeting with Jisoo. They sat in his office, a spare room decorated only with tactical displays and a single window showing the stars. Beyond the station, Bomi lay at Jisoo's feet, watching the insectoid commander with patient attention. I have been a soldier for 200 years, Vexrol said slowly. I have seen species rise to galactic prominence and fall to extinction. I have witnessed acts of courage and cowardice from every kind of creature in coalition space. I thought I understood what makes civilizations succeed. He leaned forward, his compound eyes fixed on her face. But I do not understand you. I do not understand humans. What quality allowed you to look at one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy and see a potential friend? Jisoo thought carefully before answering. The question deserved more than a simple response. In my grandmother's language, there is a concept called Jeng, she said. It does not translate perfectly, but it means something like the deep bond that forms between people or creatures who share difficult experiences together. Jeng grows from caring for each other through hardship. But there is another word that matters here. Orum. It means loneliness. She looked down at Bomi, reaching out to stroke the armored head. Humans evolved on a world that was always trying to kill us. We were not the strongest animals, not the fastest, not the most dangerous. We survived because we could not bear to be alone. We reached out to wolves and made them into dogs. We reached out to wild horses and made them into partners. We reached out to each other across tribes and nations and continents. Loneliness is painful for us. Jisoo continued, so painful that we will risk everything to find connection. When I saw Bomi trapped in those rocks, I did not see a monster. I saw a creature that was alone and afraid and hurt, and I knew exactly how that felt. Vexral sat in silence for a long moment. Your species has been among the stars for only 15 years, he said finally. In that time, you have confused and frustrated every civilization you have encountered. We cannot predict your behavior. We cannot categorize your psychology. We cannot decide if you are a threat or a treasure. We are probably both, Jisoo admitted. Humans are complicated. So I am beginning to understand. The commandant stood and walked to his window. Looking out at the endless darkness, I am going to authorize a new research division, he said. Its purpose will be to study human bonding behaviors. I believe your species possesses something valuable, something the Coalition may need in the difficult years ahead. What would you call this quality? The ability to make friends even with monsters? Jisoo stood as well, Bomi rising beside her. My grandmother would have called it love, she said simply. The stubborn insistence on caring about something other than yourself. Humans cannot help it. It is written into our nature. We would rather die trying to connect than live alone. She left the commandant's office and walked through the station toward her. Dormitory cadets from a dozen species stepped aside as she passed, their eyes fixed on the predator that walked calmly at her. Some looked frightened. Some looked curious. A few looked at her with something. That might have been the beginning of respect. Dira was waiting outside their shared room, the Salvari. Cadet had saved Jisoo's favorite snacks from the cafeteria and had cleared space on the floor for 4. Bomi to sleep. Welcome home, roommate, Dira said with a nervous smile. I hope your pet does not eat my belongings. Jisoo laughed and hugged her surprised roommate. It was the first time she had touched another person since before the survival trial. She had not realized how much she had missed simple contact. Bomi only eats things that attack me, Jisoo said. You are safe. Probably. That night, Jisoo lay in her bed and listened to the sounds of the station around her. The hum of engines, the murmur of voices, the countless small noises of a community at rest. Bomi was curled on the floor between her bed and Thera's, a living barrier against any threat that might come through the door. She thought about everything that had happened since that drop pod fell toward Vera 7. She had expected to die. Instead, she had found something precious, a friend who did not care that she was human, a friend who only cared that she was kind, and perhaps, looking at Thera's sleeping form across the room, she had found another friend as well. The galaxy was vast and dark and full of dangers, but humans had never let that stop them before. They would keep reaching out, keep forming bonds, keep insisting on connection, even when the universe tried to convince them they were alone. It was, Jisoo reflected, the most human thing of all. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, other species were beginning to realize that this strange quality might be the most powerful weapon humanity had ever developed. Not ships or soldiers or technology, just love, stubborn, impossible, unstoppable love. Bomi made a soft sound in sleep, and Jisoo smiled as she drifted off to join her friend in dreams. Day 14 arrived with a blood-red sunrise that painted the highland rocks in shades of crimson and gold. Jisoo woke to the sound of Bomi growling softly, the stalker's attention fixed on something in the sky above them. She shaded her eyes against the harsh light and saw it immediately, a shuttle, descending through the corrosive atmosphere with its heat shields glowing bright orange. Extraction had arrived. It is okay, she said to Bomi, placing a calming hand on the creature's armored neck. Those are my people. They are coming to take me home. Bomi's growl faded, but the stalker remained tense, positioning its body between Jisoo and the incoming vessel. Even now, even against a threat the creature could not possibly understand, Bomi's first instinct was to protect her. The shuttle landed in a clearing about 200 meters from their camp. Jisoo gathered her few possessions, including the notebook full of observations and sketches she had made during her trial. She had documented everything: the plants, the animals, the weather patterns, the chemical properties of various substances she had discovered. It was the most comprehensive ecological survey of Class-7 ever conducted. She also took the braided collar she had made for Bomi, a simple thing woven from tough plant fibers that had become their symbol of companionship. Bomi wore proudly, the rough collar looking almost decorative against the creature's blood-colored armor. They walked toward the shuttle together. The extraction team was already outside. 4 soldiers in heavy environmental suits with weapons drawn and ready. They had been briefed on the situation, but nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. A human woman, thin but healthy, walking calmly out of the most dangerous jungle in Coalition space with a Vareth stalker at her side, like a loyal dog, the team leader. A craft sergeant named Voth raised his weapon instinctively. Cadet Park. Step away from the creature immediately. Jisoo stopped walking and placed her hand on Bomi's head. The stalker's growl returned. Deeper this time, a clear warning to the armed soldiers. I cannot do that. Sergeant, this is Bomi. Bomi saved my life, and I will not abandon my friend. That thing is a Class-7 apex predator. That thing is coming with me, or I am not getting on your shuttle. Voth stared at her for a long moment. His silicon-based body did not show expression the way organic faces did, but his hesitation was obvious. He had orders to retrieve the human cadet. Nobody had given him orders about what to do if she refused extraction. I need to consult with command, he said. Finally, the argument that followed lasted nearly an hour. Jisoo sat on a rock with Bomi curled at her feet while the extraction team communicated with the orbital station. She could hear fragments of the conversation through Voth's open channel. Voices argued about quarantine protocols and safety regulations and the legal status of alien wildlife. Eventually, Commandant Vexerol himself joined the discussion. His calm voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone who had commanded fleets and won wars. Bring them both. I want to see this for myself. The shuttle ride back to the station was tense. The soldiers kept their weapons ready the entire time, watching Bomi with obvious fear. The stalker remained calm only because Jisoo remained calm. She spoke to her companion in a soft, steady voice, explaining what was happening and promising that everything would be fine. When they docked at the station, a medical team was waiting along with a security squad and what appeared to be every xenobiologist on staff. Jisoo walked down the ramp with Bomi beside her and faced the crowd of anxious faces. Cadet Park. Jisoo, reporting for post-trial evaluation, she said formally, and requesting permission to keep my emotional support animal. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. Bomi chose that moment to yawn, displaying rows of teeth that could bite through steel plating. The laughter stopped immediately. What followed was 3 days of testing, interviews, medical examinations, and bureaucratic chaos. Jisoo and Bomi were confined to a quarantine bay that was comfortable enough, but heavily monitored. Scientists came at all hours to take samples and run scans and ask endless questions. How did she train the stalker? What techniques did she use? Had she observed any unusual behavior? Jisoo answered everything honestly. She had not trained Bomi. She had simply helped a hurt creature and shown it kindness. The bond had developed naturally. From there, humans call this process domestication, she explained to a particularly confused xenobiologist. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Dogs, cats, horses, cattle. We take wild creatures and we form partnerships with them. It is one of the oldest human technologies. The scientist's translator struggled with the concept. You consider friendship with animals to be a technology? Everything that helps us survive is technology. Jisoo replied, humans survived our own Deathworld, not by being the strongest or the fastest, We survived by making friends, with each other, with animals, with anything that would work with us instead of against us. On the third day, Dira was finally allowed to visit the Selvari cadets stood at the entrance to the quarantine bay, her scales rippling with nervous energy as she stared at the creature that had terrorized her. Nightmares since childhood. Vera stalkers were them. Monsters that Selvari parents used to frighten children into obedience. Bomi looked up from the floor where it was resting and made a curious sound. Jizu smiled at her roommate. Thera, come in. Bomi will not hurt you. How can you be sure? Because I asked nicely. Thera entered slowly, never taking her eyes off the predator. Bomi watched her approach, but made no aggressive moves. When Thera sat down across from Jisu, the stalker simply lowered its head and closed its eyes. I watched you every day, Thera said quietly. I saw everything, the shelter, the hunting, the fight with the adult. I still do not understand how you survived. Jisu thought about the question for a long moment. My grandmother used to tell me stories about her childhood, she said finally. She grew up in a village in the mountains where life was hard. Floods, famines, cold winters that killed the weak. But she always said that the hardest part was not the environment. The hardest part was feeling alone. She looked at Bomi with obvious affection. I think that is why humans have always reached out to other creatures. Not because we are weak, but because we are lonely. We cannot stand to be alone in the universe. So we make connections wherever we can find them. Thera considered this, even on a death world. Especially on a death world, when everything is trying to kill you. Having a friend matters more than anything. Outside the quarantine bay, the Academy Board was preparing to make their final ruling on the most unusual survival trial in Coalition history. By day 7, Jisu and Bomi had developed a hunting system that worked better than either of them could have managed alone. The juvenile stalker had instincts that millions of years of evolution had sharpened to perfection. It could smell prey from great distances and track movement through dense vegetation that Jisu's human eyes could not penetrate. But Bomi was still young and inexperienced. The creature often charged at prey too early. Alerting the target and allowing it to escape Jisu provided the patience and strategy that Bomi lacked. She taught the young stalker to wait, to circle around, to drive prey toward natural barriers where escape became impossible. Together, they were far more effective than either could be separately. Good job, Jisu said as Bomi dragged their latest catch back to camp. She scratched the armored plates behind the stalker's ears. A spot she had discovered produced a rumbling sound that she interpreted as pleasure. We well tonight. The monitoring team had stopped predicting her death. Instead, they had begun taking bets on what impossible thing she would do next. Grish had lost 3 weeks of pay betting against her survival and had stopped gambling, and Tylimrath spent most of her shifts simply watching in silence, her feathered crest flat with concentration. On day 8, they moved their camp to the highland region, where the air was slightly less corrosive and the temperature swings were less extreme. Jisu had noticed that Bomi seemed more comfortable at higher elevations, and she trusted the creature's instincts about its home world. The highlands offered new challenges, but also new opportunities. The vegetation was different here, with thick mossy growths covering the rocks and strange fungal structures that glowed faintly in the darkness. Jisu documented everything in a small notebook she had made from bark and charcoal. She drew pictures of plants and animals and recorded her observations about their behavior. She was not just surviving anymore. She was conducting research on day 9. Their partnership faced its first serious test. They were hunting near a cliff edge when a massive shape emerged from a cave, hidden in the rock face. It was an adult Vara stalker, easily 4 times Bomi's size. Its armored hide was scarred from countless battles and its eyes burned with territorial rage. Jisoo froze. She had seen recordings of adult stalkers during her academy training. They were considered one of the most dangerous predators in known space. A single adult could slaughter an entire squad of armed soldiers before taking any significant damage. Running would only trigger its chase instinct. Fighting seemed impossible, but Bomi did not hesitate. The juvenile stalker launched itself at the adult with a fierce snarl, placing its small body between Jisoo and the larger predator. It was a gesture of protection that should have been impossible from a creature that had known her for less than a week. The adult stalker batted Bomi aside with contemptuous ease, sending the juvenile tumbling across the rocky ground. But the attack had bought Jisoo a few precious seconds to think. She grabbed a long branch from the ground and thrust one end into the small fire she had built for cooking. The dry wood caught flame quickly when the adult stalker turned its attention to her. Jisoo was ready. She swung the burning branch at the creature's face, aiming for its eyes. The stalker recoiled from the fire, snarling with surprise and pain. Bomi recovered and attacked again, this time going for the adult's back legs. The juvenile's teeth found a gap in the armor plates and bit down hard. The adult roared and spun to deal with this new threat. Jisoo pressed the advantage, jabbing with her torch and shouting to keep the creature confused about which enemy to focus on. The battle lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. Eventually, the adult stalker decided that this prey was not worth the effort. It retreated into its cave, leaving deep scratches on the rocky ground as a warning. Jisoo dropped her torch and ran to check on Bomi. The juvenile had taken several hits during the fight. One of its legs was bleeding, and there was a gash along its flank where the adult's claws had found purchase. "You stupid brave creature," Jisoo said as she examined the wounds. "You could have run. Why did you protect me?" Bomi made a soft sound and pressed its head against her chest. In that moment, Jisoo understood something that the Academy observers were still struggling to comprehend. This was not a temporary alliance of convenience. This was not a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. This was a bond, real and deep and mutual. She spent the rest of the day treating Bomi's wounds and keeping watch for the adult stalker's return. When night fell, she built a larger fire than usual and sat with her back against a boulder, her knife in one hand and her other hand resting on Bomi's armored head. The stalker curled around her like a protective wall, its body heat warming her against the cold highland air. "I used to feel so alone at the academy," Jisoo said quietly. "Nobody wanted to be friends with the human. They all thought I was weak and primitive and not worth their time." Bomi made a rumbling sound that might have been sympathy. "But you do not care that I am human. You just care that I helped you when you were hurt. And now you help me. That is what friendship means." She leaned her head back against the rock and looked up at the stars, somewhere up there. The Academy station was orbiting, full of people who had written her off as dead. She wondered what they were thinking now in the monitoring room. The observation team was watching this scene with emotions they struggled to name. Thera had tears running down her scaled face. Even Wrath seemed affected, her usually stoic expression softened by something that looked almost like wonder. Her stress hormones are lower than they were before the exam, Grish reported, his voice hushed, lower than her baseline readings from the academy. She is more relaxed on a Deathworld with an apex predator than she was in a dormitory surrounded by other cadets. What does that tell us about humans? Wrath asked. Nobody had an answer. Commandant Vexroll received daily reports about the human cadets' progress. Each report was more remarkable than the last. He had seen many surprising things during his long career, but nothing had prepared him for this. A human had not merely survived on a Class-7 Deathworld. She had thrived. She had made a companion of one of the most dangerous creatures in Coalition space. She had turned a death sentence into what appeared to be a camping trip with a pet. He authorized a new research initiative that very day. The Coalition needed to understand humans better because If they could do this, what else might they be capable of? On the surface of Vareth-7, Jisoo fell asleep with her hand on Bomi's head and dreamed of showing her new friend the mountains where her grandmother grew up. She was smiling in her sleep. The monsters in the darkness kept their distance. They could sense that this strange soft creature was under the protection of something that knew how to fight back. 3 days had passed since Jisoo landed on Vareth-7, and she was still alive. This fact alone had caused considerable confusion among the academy staff who monitored her. Biosigns around the clock, Senior Officer Mrath had stopped predicting her death after the second day when Jisoo built a shelter that actually worked. The human had discovered something remarkable about the local plant life. The large fern-like organisms that dominated the jungle floor secreted an acidic substance from their stems. Most creatures avoided this acid because contact with skin caused severe burns. Jisoo had watched the acid drip onto fallen branches and noticed that instead of destroying the wood completely, it seemed to fuse the fibers together once. It dried. She had tested this theory carefully, using her knife to collect small amounts of the secretion and diluting it with water from a stream she had purified. The result was a powerful natural adhesive that allowed her to bind branches and leaves into a waterproof shelter without any rope or cord. How did she figure that out? Technician Grish asked as he watched the recording of her construction process. She has no scientific equipment. She has no chemical analysis tools. She just observed and experimented. Wrath replied with something that might have been respect in her voice. Humans apparently do this. They watch and they learn and they adapt. It is unsettling. Jisoo's food situation had also stabilized in an unexpected way. The jungle was full of creatures that could kill her in seconds, but it was also full of smaller animals that served as prey for the larger predators. She had noticed that the tiny scavenger creatures avoided certain carcasses while feeding eagerly on others. Logic told her that the rejected meat must contain toxins that even the resistant local wildlife could not process. The meat they did eat was probably safer for consumption. She had tested this theory with small portions, waiting hours between each bite to monitor her body's reaction. By day 3, she had identified 2 protein sources that her human digestive system could handle without serious consequences. The meat tasted terrible, but it kept her alive on the orbital station. Thera had barely slept since her roommate's accidental deployment. She spent every free moment watching the monitoring feeds and reading the reports from the observation team. The other Selvari students thought she was being foolish. Why care so much about a human who was going to die anyway? But Thera could not look away. There was something fascinating about watching Jisoo adapt to an environment that should have killed her on the first day. The human moved through the jungle with careful confidence, always alert but never panicked. She treated every challenge as a puzzle to be solved rather than a death sentence to be feared. On the afternoon of day 5, something happened that would change the entire nature of Jisoo's survival trial. She was walking along a rocky ridge when she heard a sound that did not fit the usual pattern of jungle noise. It was a high-pitched whine. Almost like crying, Jisoo followed the sound carefully, her knife ready in her hand. She expected to find some kind of trap or ambush. What she found instead was a juvenile Varus stalker. The creature was about the size of a large dog with 6 powerful legs, armored skin the color of dried blood, and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. It was also clearly in distress. One of its front legs was caught in a crack between 2 crystalline rocks, wedged so tightly that the young predator could not pull free. Jisoo stood at the edge of the clearing and studied the situation. Every survival instinct told her to walk away. Varus stalkers were responsible for more cadet deaths on this planet than any other species. Even the juveniles were dangerous. A smart person would leave this creature to its fate and continue searching for food and water. But Jisoo was not thinking about survival statistics. She was thinking about her grandmother's old cat, the one that had shown up at their door during a terrible storm. Half-starved and covered in wounds, her grandmother had taken the cat inside and nursed it back to health despite everyone saying it was a waste of resources. That cat had lived another 12 years and had been the most loyal companion her grandmother ever had. "You are not a cat," Jisoo said to the trapped stalker, "but you are alone and scared and hurt." "I know what that feels like." She approached slowly, keeping her movements predictable and non-threatening. The juvenile snarled at her, its teeth gleaming in the red light. Jisoo did not retreat. "I am going to help you," she said calmly. "This will probably hurt, but I need you to stay still." She knelt beside the trapped leg and examined the rock formation. The crystalline structure was hard but brittle. If she could chip away at the edges, she might be able to widen the crack enough to free the leg. She worked carefully with her knife, breaking off small pieces of crystal, while the stalker watched her with suspicious yellow eyes. The creature could have bitten her head off at any moment, but something in her calm demeanor seemed to confuse it. After 20 minutes of careful work, the crack was wide enough. Jisoo gently guided the injured leg free. The stalker immediately scrambled backward, putting distance between itself and the strange creature that had helped it. Jisoo sat back on her heels and smiled beneath her mask. "See? Not so bad. Now let me look at that leg properly." The wound was deep where the rock had cut into the armored skin. Jisoo had discovered earlier that certain tree saps on this planet had antiseptic properties. She collected some from a nearby trunk and carefully applied it to the stalker's injury. The creature flinched but did not attack when she finished treating the wound. Jisoo stood and began walking back toward her shelter. She did not expect to see the juvenile stalker again, but when she looked over her shoulder a few minutes later, the creature was following her at a distance. It followed her all the way back to camp. It was still there when she woke up the next morning. Curled near the entrance of her shelter like a guard dog, Jisoo named it Bomi, which meant spring in her grandmother's language. It was a name for new beginnings and unexpected gifts in the academy monitoring room. The observation team was in chaos. "She cannot keep that thing," Grish insisted. "It is a Class-7 apex predator." "She did not ask permission," Mrath noted dryly, "and it does not seem interested in eating her." "This is unprecedented. I am aware." Thera watched the feed with wide eyes as Jisoo shared a portion of her breakfast with the creature that should have been her executioner. The stalker ate from Jisoo's hand with surprising gentleness, its terrible teeth coming nowhere near her fingers. "She made a friend," Thera whispered to herself. On a Deathworld, she made a friend. Senior officers from the Academy Board were now watching the feeds as well. They had called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. Some argued that Jisoo had experienced a psychological break and was anthropomorphizing, a dangerous predator that would eventually kill her. Others suggested that humans might possess some unknown ability to manipulate animal behavior. A few quietly wondered if they had been underestimating humanity all along. None of them could explain what they were seeing. None of them could predict what would happen next on the surface of Vera 7. Jisoo was teaching Bomi to fetch sticks while the most hostile environment in Coalition space tried and failed to kill her. The orbital station hung above the planet like a metal moon, its lights blinking in the darkness of space as hundreds of cadets prepared for the most important test of their military careers. Cadet Park Jisoo stood in line with 47 other students, her boots clicking against the cold floor as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She was the only human in her cohort, a fact that had made her first year at the Galactic Coalition Military Academy both lonely and interesting. The aliens around her came in all shapes and sizes. Some had scales and others had fur. A few were made of living crystal, and one species seemed to be nothing more than floating gas, held together by electromagnetic fields. None of them looked at her with friendship in their eyes. Humans were new to the galactic stage. Having only achieved faster than light travel 15 years ago, most species still considered them primitive and weak. "Attention, cadets," the announcement system crackled to life with the voice of Commandant Vexrol, a tall insectoid creature. With compound eyes that saw everything and judged most of it harshly, you will now receive your survival trial assignments. Each of you will be deployed to an environment matched to your species' tolerance threshold. You will survive for 14 standard days with only basic equipment. Those who return will advance to the second year. Those who do not return will be remembered at the memorial service next month. Jisoo felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her face calm. She had trained for this moment for an entire year. She had studied every known hostile environment in Coalition space. She had practiced building shelters and finding food and treating wounds. She was ready, or at least she thought she was. The assignments appeared on the screens above each cadet's head, glowing letters that sealed their fates for the next 2 weeks. Jisoo looked up at her screen and frowned. Vareth 7. She did not recognize the name around her. The other cadets were checking their own assignments and comparing notes with their friends. No one bothered to speak to her in the control room 3 levels above. A technician named Grish was enjoying his lunch when he noticed something strange on his monitor. He set down his food and leaned closer to the screen, his 4 eyes narrowing as he read the deployment roster. "That cannot be right," he muttered. To himself, he checked the data again. The human female had been assigned to Vareth 7. That was a Class 7 Deathworld reserved for the Kreth cadets, the silicon-based lifeforms, who could survive in environments that would kill any carbon-based creature within hours. He reached for his communication device to alert the deployment officers, but his clawed hand knocked over his drink instead by the time he cleaned up the mess and made the call. Cadet Park Jisoo's drop pod had already entered the atmosphere of Vareth 7. "What do you mean she is already down there?" Senior Officer Mrath demanded, her feathered crest rising with anger. "I mean exactly what I said," Grish replied nervously. "The pod launched on automatic sequence. She is on the surface now. Can we extract her?" "Negative. Vareth 7 has interference storms that block all transporter signals. The storms will not clear for 14 days. Mrath stared at him for a long moment before turning to the tactical display. The planet below them was a nightmare of red and orange, its surface covered in toxic jungles and volcanic plains. The atmosphere was corrosive to most organic tissue. The temperature swung between freezing and boiling depending on the time of day, and the wildlife was specifically evolved to hunt and kill anything that moved. She will be dead within 6 hours. Mrath said quietly, possibly less, in the cadet dormitory. A Selvari student named Thera was watching the deployment feeds on her personal screen when she noticed her roommate's name appear in the emergency alert channel. Thera had scales, the color of deep ocean water, and eyes that could see heat signatures through walls. She was not friends with the human exactly, but they had shared a room for a year, and that created a certain bond, whether you wanted it or not. "No," Thera whispered as she read the details of the error. "No, no, no." She watched helplessly as the tracking system showed Jisoo's pod plummeting through the toxic atmosphere of Vareth 7. The biosign monitors spiked wildly during entry, showing elevated heart rate and stress hormones and cellular damage from the corrosive air that leaked into the pod through microscopic cracks. Then the pod landed, and something strange happened. Jisoo's biosigns stabilized. Her heart rate dropped to normal. Her stress hormones decreased. She was alive and apparently calm. Thera leaned closer to the screen, her claws digging into the desk surface as she tried to understand what she was seeing. On the surface of Vareth 7, Jisoo climbed out of her smoking pod and looked around at the hellscape that surrounded her. The sky was the color of dried blood. The air burned her throat with every breath. The jungle around her was full of sounds that promised violence and death. Plants with razor-sharp leaves swayed in a hot wind that carried the smell of sulfur and decay. Something large moved in the shadows between the trees, its eyes reflecting the dim red light. Jisoo took a deep breath and coughed as the air attacked her lungs. She pulled her emergency filter mask from her pack and strapped it over her face. Better not good, but better. She surveyed her surroundings with the careful attention of someone who had grown up hearing stories about survival against impossible odds. Her grandmother had lived through floods and landslides and famines. Her grandfather had walked across frozen mountains with nothing but determination and a small knife. Her parents had immigrated to a new continent with empty pockets and hungry children. Humans were not strangers to hostile environments. They had been fighting against nature since they first climbed down from the trees and decided to walk upright across the savannah. This planet was dangerous. Yes, but Jisoo had danger in her blood. It was part of her inheritance as a member of the human species. Okay, she said to herself, her voice muffled by the mask. This is not so different from grandmother's stories about monsoon season in the mountains. First I need water, then shelter, then food. One problem at a time. She checked her basic equipment pack, a knife, a fire starter, water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, and a thin emergency blanket. Not much, but enough to start. She picked a direction that seemed slightly less deadly than the others and began to walk above her in orbit. The academy staff watched her first steps into the wilderness with a mixture of horror and fascination. No carbon-based life form had ever survived more than 8 hours on Vareth 7. The current record was held by a Morthian soldier who had been accidentally transported there during a navigation error. He had lasted 7 hours and 43 minutes before the wildlife found him. Jisoo walked calmly through the jungle, her eyes scanning for threats while her mind catalogued every detail of her environment. She had 14 days to survive. She did not intend to merely survive. She intended to prove that humans belonged among the stars just as much as any other species, and somewhere in the shadows of that alien jungle, something was watching her with curious, hungry eyes, something that would change everything.